All right, welcome back to the deep dive. And today we are heading somewhere that I have to be honest was a bit of a blind spot for me before we started digging into this.
I think it is for a lot of people, really.
Yeah, we are heading east, and I don't mean, East Asia in the usual sense or the East Coast. We're talking about a part of the world that for so many people, even people living in the same country, is just this massive question mark. We are talking about India's northeast.
It's a region that's often described as a land of strangers in the mist.
Oh, Strangers of the Mist. Wow, that's such an evocative title. It sounds like a mystery novel or something.
It really does, doesn't it? And that's actually the title of our main source today, Strangers of the Mist by Sanjoy Hazarika. It's considered one of the definitive books on the region.
And mystery isn't too far off, is it?
Not at all, because for decades, this part of the world has been wrapped in a kind of fog. I mean, literally, you've got rainforests and hills, but also metaphorically, it's been hidden by, bad policy, restricted access permits, and just a general lack of understanding from the outside world.
Well, I can tell you the fog definitely lifted for me reading this book, but what I saw underneath was pretty intense. We're not talking about a travel guide here.
No, not even close.
This book is heavy. It's got war, it's got these massive migration crises, political backstabbing that, I mean, it would make House of Cards look like a school play. But before we get in all that drama, can we just look at a map for a second? Because when I pulled it up, my jaw kind of dropped.
It's a very striking map.
It's terrifyingly fragile.
Yeah.
You see this massive, diamond-shaped landmass of India, the part everyone recognizes. And then way off to the east, connected by what looks like a single thread, is this huge other chunk of land.
And that thread you mentioned is the absolute key to understanding the entire psychology of the region. It's officially called the Siliguri Corridor.
But everyone calls it the chicken's neck.
Everyone. The
Now-
chicken's neck. And how wide do you think that neck is?
I looked it up. It's insane. At its narrowest point, it's what, 20 kilometers?
20, maybe 22 kilometers. That's it.
I mean, I run 10 kilometers on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
You could basically run across the only land bridge between the Northeast and the rest of India in a couple of hours.
Exactly. And if that corridor were to be blocked, the entire Northeast, we're talking 7 states, hundreds of tribes, millions and millions of people, would be completely cut off from India by land.
That geography has to create this deep sense of vulnerability. It's like you're just dangling there.
It's a feeling of precariousness. And then you look at what's surrounding them. It's not other Indian states.
No, it's all foreign countries.
Right. You're surrounded by Bangladesh, Bhutan, China, and Myanmar. Hazarika makes this really crucial point early in the book.
That it's closer to Hanoi than New Delhi.
Exactly. Culturally, geographically, if you're standing in the Northeast, you are closer to the capitals of Southeast Asia than you are to your own capital.
He calls it Asia in miniature.
Asia in miniature. It's the perfect description. It's where the brown and yellow races meet. You have this incredible diversity, Tibeto-Burman languages, Mon Khmer dialects, Austroasiatic roots. You have tribes that have way more in common with the hill peoples of Vietnam or Thailand than they do with a farmer in, say, Punjab.
So you have this region that looks and feels like Southeast Asia. It has this history of powerful independent kingdoms like the Ahoms who ruled for 600 years.
A very long time.
But it's being governed by bureaucrats sitting in New Delhi, thousands of kilometers away, in a completely different world.
And that is the central tension of this whole story. It's the clash between what Hazarika calls indigenous identity, people trying to hold on to their land, their culture, who they are, and demographic survival.
Demographic survival, that sounds ominous. You mean the fear of being wiped out?
The fear of being outnumbered, of becoming a minority in your own homeland. That's the core fear. So this is a story about land, it's a story about fear, and it's about how decisions made in faraway capitals by people who've never set foot in the mist can just completely devastate a region.
Okay, so we're going to unpack all of that. We're going to talk about a migration crisis so huge they actually gave it a name, the Bangladesh Syndrome.
A very loaded term.
And we're going to get into this political poker game in the 1940s that almost led to the state of Assam becoming part of Pakistan. I mean, That's a piece of history I had absolutely no idea about.
Most people don't. It was an incredibly close call.
But I want to start with something that on the surface sounds almost mundane. It sounds like a minor inconvenience. But the more I read about it, the more I realized it's the perfect symbol for how neglected this region feels. I want to talk about clocks.
Ah, yes. The tyranny of the time zone.
Hazarika calls it the CPWD syndrome, right?
Yeah.
The Central Public Works Department syndrome.
It's a great little piece of bureaucratic snark. The CPWD, they build government buildings all over India, and the joke is that they have one blueprint.
One blueprint for everything.
One blueprint. So whether they're building a house in the scorching deserts of Rajasthan, or the snowy Himalayas, or the rainforests of Assam, they build the exact same house with the exact same windows and the same orientation.
One size fits all, even when it fits absolutely nobody.
Exactly. And Indian Standard Time, or IST, is the ultimate CPWD solution. You have this massive country, one of the biggest in the world, running on a single time zone.
Which I guess is fine if you're in the middle. But the Northeast is way, way out on the eastern edge. It borders China. So walk me through what that actually means for a person living there day to day.
Okay, so let's use some data from the book. Hazarika brings up the work of a filmmaker, a guy named Janu Barua, who really dug into this.
Okay.
Barua calculated the actual time difference between the easternmost point of India, which is in the Patkai Hills bordering Myanmar, and the westernmost point in Gujarat.
And what's the gap?
It's 126 minutes.
126, so over 2 full hours.
Over 2 hours. So the sun physically rises 2 hours earlier in the northeast than it does on the west coast of India.
So let me get this straight. You're living in Assam. The sun comes up at what, 4 in the morning, 4:30 in the summer. It's blazing daylight.
The world is awake. The birds are singing.
But because you're following Delhi's clock, your office, your kid's school, it doesn't open until 10 a.m.
10 a.m. So you've just burned through 5 or 6 hours of prime usable daylight. Doing what? Waiting.
Waiting for the clock to catch up to the sun.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. Because the sun rose so early, it also sets ridiculously early. By 4 p.m. in the winter, it's pitch black in the northeast.
But if you're working a standard 9 to 5 job,
You are working the last hour or two of your day in total darkness. You're burning electricity. Kids are trying to do their homework in the dark. Meanwhile, back in Mumbai or Delhi, the sun is still up and people are finishing their workday in natural light.
that must be so incredibly frustrating. It's like you're living with permanent jet lag. Your body clock is telling you to wake up, but the government's clock says go back to sleep. And then your body is saying it's nighttime, and the clock is saying, no, you've still got an hour of work left.
It creates this profound psychological disconnect. It is a daily reminder to the people of the Northeast that their reality doesn't matter. Only Delhi's reality matters. And beyond the psychology, the economic cost is just staggering.
Right. Barua ran the numbers on this, didn't he?
He did. He estimated that over a period of 40 years, this irrational adherence to a single time zone has caused a loss of roughly 43,800 crore rupees.
43,000 crore. I mean, that's billions and billions of dollars.
Billions. Just gone. Wasted on electricity because lights are on when they shouldn't be, and lost productivity because people are working against their natural rhythms. Just vanished into the mist, so to speak.
So, surely someone has proposed fixing this. Seems like such an easy win. Just give them a different time zone.
Oh, there have been many proposals. There was a big push for something called Patkai time, which would be a separate zone for the Northeast, or even just advancing the whole country's clock by half an hour. Something.
So why hasn't it happened?
The security lobby.
The security lobby. What are they afraid of? That if you change the clocks, the country will fall apart.
That is literally the fear. There is this deep-seated paranoia in the central government that if you grant the Northeast a separate time zone, it's a symbolic step towards secession.
You're kidding.
No. They think if the clocks are different, people will start to think of themselves as a different country. They prioritize this abstract idea of national integrity over common sense and economic benefit.
That's just wild. I mean, the U.S. has 6 time zones.
Yes.
Russia has 11. I don't think anyone in California is planning to secede from Washington, D.C. because they're 3 hours behind.
It is absurd, but it tells you everything about how fragile that relationship is. New Delhi is terrified of letting the Northeast be different, even though it is fundamentally different. But the great irony is, people in the Northeast have already solved this problem themselves, in a way.
You're talking about tea garden time.
Yes. This is this fascinating little act of, well, rebellion, or maybe just practicality. The tea industry in Assam is enormous. The British set it up over a century ago, and the British planters were, above all, capitalists. They looked at the sun and said, why on earth are we wasting all this daylight?
They didn't care about national integrity. They cared about profits.
Precisely. So the tea gardens, to this day, run on their own unofficial time. It's generally 1 hour ahead of Indian Standard Time. It's not on any government books, but if you go to a tea garden, the morning siren to start work blows at 6:00 a.m. garden time, which is actually 5:00 a.m. Indian Standard Time.
So you have these little pockets of sanity, the tea gardens operating efficiently, surrounded by a sea of bureaucratic dysfunction.
It's a relic of British efficiency that works perfectly, and yet the government refuses to adopt it for the rest of the population. It just perfectly sets the stage for the kind of neglect we're going to see over and over in Hazarika's book. If they won't even fix the clock to match the sun, how can you expect them to fix the really hard problem?
And the problems get so much harder than clocks. The biggest one, the one that looms over this entire book like a storm cloud, is migration. Hazarika calls it the Bangladesh syndrome.
This is the issue. If you want to understand the modern politics of the Northeast, you have to look next door. You have to understand Bangladesh.
Hazarika uses a term that sent me right back to my college economics class. He calls Bangladesh a Malthusian nightmare. Can we just unpack that for a second? What does he mean?
Well, Thomas Malthus was an 18th century economist, and he had this very gloomy prediction that population growth would eventually outpace the food supply, leading to, famine and catastrophe.
So Malthusian nightmare just means too many people and not enough land.
In a nutshell, yes. But the scale is hard to comprehend. Let's look at population density. The global average is about 63 people per square kilometer.
Okay, 63. Got it.
Bangladesh has a density of around 969 people per square kilometer. In some districts, it's far, far higher. It is the most densely populated country on Earth if you exclude tiny city-states like Singapore or Monaco.
That's just claustrophobic to even think about.
And it's not just about the space, it's about the land itself literally disappearing from under their feet. Geographically, Bangladesh is basically the drain, or the nozzle, as Hazarika calls it, for the entire Ganges-Brahmaputra-Meghna river system.
So all the water from the Himalayas, from Tibet, from Nepal, from Northeast India.
It all funnels down through Bangladesh to get to the Bay of Bengal.
So when it floods.
When it floods, it doesn't just flood, it destroys. Riverbank erosion is a constant crisis there. The rivers are so powerful, they just shift their course, swallowing entire villages, farms, markets overnight. Hazarika estimates that this erosion displaces 1 million people every year.
1 million people a year.
Yeah.
Just losing the ground they live on.
Yes. Just think about that. You wake up one morning and your farm is gone. The river just ate it. You have no money, your only skill is farming, and now you have no land. You can't go south, that's the ocean. You can't really go west. Into West Bengal, it's already packed. So where do you go?
You go where there's space. You go north and east. Into the northeast.
Exactly. Into Assam, into Meghalaya, where the land is comparatively empty.
And Hazarika puts such a human face on this. It's not just stats. He tells the story of a man named Sheikh Bara. And I think we need to spend a moment on his story because it explains the why of this migration better than any data point.
Sheikh Bara's story it's heartbreaking, and it's completely typical. Hazarika finds him living in a slum in Nizamuddin, which is in Delhi. But his journey started decades earlier in what was then East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, back in 1971.
Right, so this was during the violent war for Bangladeshi independence.
The war was the catalyst, but the root cause was hunger. Sheikh Bara was a landless peasant. He owned nothing. He describes the night he left. And it wasn't some organized march. It was pure desperation. He just crossed the border in the dead of night.
I can just picture it. Pitch black, maybe wading through wetlands, trying to find a gap in a porous fence line, terrified of the border guards.
And he talks about bribing the guards. That is such a crucial detail. The border isn't a wall. It's a marketplace. You pay a few rupees, the guard looks the other way.
And from there, he just kept moving.
Worked his way from the border, doing odd jobs, moving deeper and deeper into India until he finally reached Delhi.
And this is the part of his story that really floored me. When Hazarika is interviewing him, Sheikh Bara isn't hiding in some basement. He has a ration card. He is a registered voter in India.
That's the great paradox. He is, by any legal definition, an illegal immigrant. But the Indian political system has absorbed him. He's part of a vote bank. Local politicians protect him and his community in exchange for their votes at election time.
And when Hazarika asks him if he'll ever go back to Bangladesh, his answer is just, it's so final.
It's chilling. He just says, "We will never go back. There is nothing for us in Bangladesh."
Nothing for us. That's the engine driving all of this.
No.
It's not a choice between good and bad. It's a choice between something and nothing.
It's survival. And this is where Hazarika introduces a very controversial concept, one that apparently circulates in some intellectual circles in Dhaka, the idea of Lebensraum.
That is a very, very loaded term.
Mm-hmm.
It's German for living space.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a term you associate with, well, with Nazi expansionism.
It is. And Hazarika is careful to use it to describe a geopolitical mindset, not to endorse it. The idea is that the population of Bangladesh is expanding so rapidly that it naturally needs an outlet. It needs space to spill over. And the northeast of India, with its forests, its land, its resources, is seen by some theorists as the natural hinterland for that expansion.
So from their point of view, borders are just lines on a map, but hunger is a physical reality.
Precisely. And that's what Hazarika means by the Bangladesh syndrome. The demographic pressure inside the balloon is so immense that it will inevitably leak out into the low-pressure areas next door. Hunger, as he says, doesn't respect international treaties.
But here's the twist in the story that I found so interesting. We tend to think of this as a modern problem, something that started in 1971 with the war. But Hazarika traces it back much, much further. This migration wasn't always an accident of geography. At one point, it was official government policy.
This is where the British colonial legacy becomes so critical to the story. The British look at Assam in the early 20th century. They see these vast, lush river valleys, thick forests, incredibly fertile soil. And do you know what they called it?
But let me guess. A paradise.
Ah,
An untapped resource.
they called it a wasteland.
The wasteland, of course they did.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't generating enough tax revenue.
To the colonial mind, if land isn't being intensively farmed and taxed, it's wasted. So the British began to actively encourage hardworking Muslim peasants from East Bengal, specifically from a district called Mymensingh, to move into Assam. They wanted them to clear the jungles, grow jute and rice, and most importantly, pay taxes.
They were known as the Mizoram.
Yes. And they were, by all accounts, incredibly industrious. There's a description from a 1931 census report that Hazarika quotes, comparing their movement up the river valleys to an army of ants.
An army of ants.
Just inexorably moving forward, clearing land, settling down, and completely changing the demographic face of the region.
And it didn't take long for this to shift from being about economics to being about pure politics.
Yeah.
And this is where we need to introduce one of the most fascinating characters in the entire book, a man named Sir Syed Mohammed Sadadullah.
Sadadullah, the premier of Assam in the 1940s. What a complex figure.
Hazarika paints this incredible picture of him. He's an aristocrat, a bit of a ladies' man, incredibly charming. And he was apparently obsessed with details. Hazarika found his personal ledgers.
Yes, he kept these meticulous accounts of his personal spending, everything from how many eggs he bought to the cost of his hair oil and tickets to the Irish Derby.
So he's tracking his hair oil expenses, while outside his window, the entire fate of a region is being decided. Because Sadullah was a leader of the Muslim League, and he had a very specific political project.
He wanted Assam to become part of the future nation of Pakistan.
Exactly. When the idea of Pakistan was taking shape, the Muslim League was determined to include Assam. But they had a numbers problem. Assam didn't have a Muslim majority. It was predominantly Hindu and indigenous animist.
So Sadullah decided he needed to fix the numbers.
He launched a government campaign called Grow More Food. Now, this was during World War II, so on the surface, the goal was to boost agriculture to support the war effort. It sounded perfectly noble.
Grow more food! I mean, who could possibly argue with that? But in practice, Sadullah used the campaign as a cover to open up vast tracts of government land grazing reserves, forest lands that belonged to tribal communities, and settle them specifically with Muslim immigrants from Bengal. He was literally importing voters.
Lord Wavell, the British viceroy at the time, saw right through this, didn't he?
Oh, completely. Wavell was this cynical old soldier. He knew a political scheme when he saw one. He wrote in his diary that Sadullah's real policy wasn't grow more food, it was grow more Muslims.
Grow more Muslims. That's such a chillingly blunt assessment.
But it was absolutely accurate. It was demographic engineering, plain and simple. The goal was to rapidly increase the Muslim population of Assam so that when the British finally left and the lines of partition were drawn, the Muslim League could turn around and claim, look, this is a Muslim majority area, it belongs in Pakistan.
You can see now why the indigenous Assamese people felt so paranoid. I mean, they were watching their land being taken, their culture being swamped, and their political future being hijacked, all under the guise of farming.
That paranoia is the absolute root of everything that follows.
But the Bengali migrants weren't the only ones brought in from the outside. There was another, even earlier wave of migration that Hazarika details. And the story of this one is, if anything, even more brutal. We have to go back to the tea gardens.
Yes, the tea tribes. This is a completely different migration story with a very different legacy.
Okay, so the British discover wild tea growing in Assam. Actually, let's be fair. They were shown where it was by the local Singpo tribe and an Assamese nobleman named Maniram Dewan.
A very important point. They didn't discover it so much as commercialize it.
Right, but they wanted to turn it into a massive industry. So they clear huge areas of jungle for these plantations, but they hit a major snag.
Hmm.
They had no one to work them.
The local Assamese people said, no thank you.
Why not?
They were self-sufficient rice farmers. They had their own land, their own social structure. Why on earth would they give that up to work for slave wages as a coolie under a white plantation manager? They refused.
So the British had to import their labor force.
They had to. And they looked to central India, to places like Bihar, Orissa, the Chotan-Nagpur Plateau. They targeted the tribal people there, Santhals, Mundas, Orains. These were communities that were often desperate, facing famine and colonial exploitation at home.
And the recruitment process itself sounds like something from a horror novel. Hazarika talks about these figures called coolie catchers.
They were essentially human traffickers. These recruiters were paid by the head. They would go into these desperate villages in central India and spin these fantastic lies. They told people that Assam was a magical land where money literally grew on trees. You could just shake a tea bush and silver coins would fall out.
The oldest lie in the book. The streets are paved with gold.
And people believed it because they were starving. But the journey to Assam, it was a death march. They were crammed onto river steamers to travel up the Brahmaputra River. The conditions were horrific, unsanitary, overcrowded, no medical care at all.
The death toll Hazarika cites is just shocking. I had to read the numbers twice to make sure I wasn't misreading them.
It's unbelievable. In just one 3-year period between 1863 and 1866, about 85,000 workers were shipped to Assam. Out of that number, 30,000 died before they even reached the tea gardens.
30,000 people. That's a mortality rate of over 35% just on the journey there.
Dead from cholera, dysentery, malnutrition, sheer exhaustion. And for those who survived and made it to the gardens, they found a life that was barely better than slavery. They were flogged for laziness. They were paid in scrip they could only use at the company store. Women gave birth in the fields and had to go right back to plucking leaves. They were kept in total isolation from the local Assamese population.
And because they were so isolated, they never went back home.
They couldn't. They were trapped. Their descendants today are known as the tea tribes of Assam. There are about 4 million of them. They form this very distinct community with their own culture, separate from the indigenous Assamese and separate from the Bengali migrants.
And Hazarika makes a really interesting point about why there wasn't as much conflict between the locals and the tea tribes as there was with the Bengalis.
It all comes down to one thing: land.
Right.
The tea tribes lived within the confines of the plantations, in the labor lines provided by the company. They didn't go out and buy up farmland in the villages. They didn't compete for the same resources that the indigenous people relied on for their survival. The Bengali migrants, on the other hand, were land hungry. That's what they came for. And in an agrarian society, if you take the land, you're taking their lifeblood.
So, okay, let's fast forward to the 1940s. You have this absolute powder keg of a situation. You've got the indigenous Assamese, you've got the tea tribes working the gardens, you have the Bengali Muslims moving in, encouraged by Saadullah to change the demographics. And standing against Saadullah is the other great protagonist of this drama, Gopinath Bardaloy.
Bardaloy is the giant of modern Assamese history. He was the leader of the Congress Party, a follower of Gandhi. But he was a very different kind of man from Saadullah.
Hazarika gives him a lot of personality, too. He wasn't some, austere, one-dimensional politician. He loved cricket. He played tennis.
There's that great anecdote where he was once heavily criticized because he was seen playing tennis at a club while just down the road students were being beaten by the police during a protest. It shows you he came from a certain middle-class comfort. He wasn't a born revolutionary. He liked good clothes. He liked music. But when the time came, he became the absolute bulwark against the Muslim League's plans.
The rivalry between Bardaloy and Saadullah plays out like a political thriller. There's this one moment in 1945, Hazarika calls it a coup. It's just a masterclass in political maneuvering.
It really was brilliant. So Saadullah was the premier, but his hold on power was incredibly shaky. His majority in the assembly was razor thin. Bardaloy saw an opening to stop the Grow More Muslims policy.
So what was his move?
He made Saadullah an offer he couldn't refuse. Bardaloy went to him and said, look, we, the Congress Party, will support your government, we'll keep you in power, but there's one condition. You have to scrap your land settlement policy and stop the evictions of indigenous people.
So basically, stop the migration and you get to keep your fancy premier's chair.
Exactly. And Saadullah, being a political survivor above all else, agreed. He valued his position more than the ideology. This, of course, infuriated his bosses in the Central Muslim League. Jinnah, Liaquat Ali Khan, they were absolutely furious. He was dismantling their grand strategy for Pakistan just to stay in office for a few more months.
And then Bartolome pulled the rug out from under him.
As soon as Saadullah had agreed and completely alienated his own base, Bartolome withdrew his support anyway. Sadullah's government collapsed. It was cold, it was calculated, and it was politically brilliant.
But Bartolome's biggest fight wasn't against Saadullah. He was against his own party. And this is the part of the deep dive that genuinely shocked me. We're in 1946 now. Independence is just around the corner. And the British come up with a final plan to transfer power called the Cabinet Mission.
This is the absolute climax of the political history of the Northeast. The British proposed this complex system to transfer power. They wanted to group the provinces of India together into 3 sections, and Assam was placed in Section C.
And who else was in Section C with Assam?
Bengal.
The one province with a massive Muslim majority that wanted to go to Pakistan.
Exactly. The fear was simple mathematics. If Assam was forced into a group with Bengal, the Bengali representatives would vastly outnumber the Assamese representatives in any joint assembly. They would dominate the process of writing the new constitution for the group.
It's like gerrymandering on a national scale. You take a small state that votes one way, you forcibly glue it to a massive state that votes the other way, and poof, the small state's voice is completely drowned out.
That's a perfect analogy. The Assamese leadership was terrified that if they entered this grouping, they would be swallowed whole, they'd lose their identity, and eventually the Muslim League majority in the group would simply vote to take the entire group, including Assam, into what would become East Pakistan. Assam would cease to be part of India.
So Bartolome is screaming no at the top of his lungs. But the people who should have been his staunchest allies, the national leaders of the Indian National Congress, Nehru and Sardar Patel, what did they do?
They betrayed him.
Nehru and Patel, the founding fathers of modern India.
They were looking at the bigger picture from their perspective in Delhi. They wanted a strong central government for India. They wanted the British out as quickly as possible. The Muslim League was refusing to join the main constituent assembly unless they got these groups. So to appease the League and keep the dream of a united India alive, Nehru and Patel were willing to sacrifice Assam.
That is just brutal. They were willing to trade an entire state for what they saw as the greater good.
There is a truly devastating quote that Hazarika includes from the governor of Bengal at the time. He reported that Sardar Patel, the so-called Iron Man of India, felt that, and I'm quoting here, principles have sometimes to be swallowed for the sake of expediency. Surely the whole of India cannot be plunged into a civil war for the sake of Assam.
For the sake of Assam. Wow. You can just hear the dismissal in that phrase. To them, in Delhi, Assam was expendable.
There was a bargaining chip. So Bartolome is in absolute panic. He realizes his own leaders have sold him down the river. He has nowhere else to turn. So in one last desperate move, he decides to play the Gandhi card.
He sends 2 young aides to find Mahatma Gandhi. And this wasn't a meeting in some nice office in Delhi.
No, not at all. Gandhi at this time was in the thick of it. He was in a remote village in Bengal called Srirampur. He was walking barefoot through villages that had been torn apart by Hindu-Muslim riots, trying to personally bring peace.
So these 2 young aides from Assam, they trek through this rioting countryside. They finally find Gandhi in this little hut, and they explain the whole situation. They tell him, Nehru and Patel are forcing us into this grouping with Bengal. They say we have to obey the party's decision.
Now, you would expect Gandhi, the ultimate champion of unity, the man who wanted to keep the Congress Party together, to say, listen to your leaders, don't cause trouble, unity is paramount.
That's exactly what I would expect him to say, fall in line.
But Gandhi does the exact opposite. He looks at these 2 young men and he tells them to revolt.
Revolt. Against the Congress leadership.
Yes. He said, and this is a direct quote, if Assam keeps quiet, it is finished. Assam should not come out if it does not feel like it. Revolt. He gave the Assam Congress his personal permission to defy the National Congress, to defy Nehru, to defy Patel. He empowered them to be rebels.
That is an unbelievable moment in history. The father of the nation telling one of his own state branches to rebel against the party machinery that he himself had built.
It was the absolute turning point. Bolstered by Gandhi's moral authority, Bardoloi went back to the Constituent Assembly and he stood like a rock. He said, "We will not join the grouping, period." He refused to budge. And because he stood firm, the entire grouping plan for Section C collapsed.
So if Bardoloi hadn't sent those aides, or if Gandhi had been in a different mood that day?
The map of modern India would look completely different. Assam, and likely the entire northeast, because Assam was the gateway to the region, would almost certainly have become part of East Pakistan and today would be part of Bangladesh.
That is a what-if scenario that just makes you dizzy. It shows how much individual actions and moments can matter in history. One conversation in a hut basically saved a state.
Absolutely. Bardoloi saved the political map. But, and this is the tragedy of the story, he couldn't stop the social forces. The political border was secured, but the migration across it continued. The alienation from Delhi continued. The feeling of being ignored and expendable continued.
And that brings us to the modern echoes of this history. Because Hazarika's book doesn't just end in 1947. He takes us into the 1980s and 90s, to the rise of violent insurgency.
Well, if you treat a region as a footnote for decades, if you ignore its fears and exploit its resources, eventually it's going to snap. The insurgency groups like ULFA, the United Liberation Front of Assam, were born directly out of these historical grievances. They were young men who felt their identity was being wiped out by migration and their wealth was being drained by Delhi.
Hazarika tells one particular story about the insurgency that I found absolutely fascinating, mostly because it involves a country we almost never hear about in the context of war, Bhutan.
Ah, yes. Operation All Clear. This is such a surreal side story.
So set the scene for us. This is the late 90s, early 2000s.
The ULFA insurgents are under a lot of pressure from the Indian Army, so they do what guerrilla groups often do. They cross the border, they set up these elaborate camps in the dense, inaccessible jungles of southern Bhutan.
And Bhutan is this tiny, famously peaceful Buddhist kingdom. They don't have a massive military machine.
Their army was mostly ceremonial. They're known for gross national happiness, not for counterinsurgency warfare. But the insurgents became a huge problem. They were acting like they owned the place, thumbing their nose at Bhutanese sovereignty. And India was putting immense pressure on Bhutan to kick them out.
So what did Bhutan do?
In a very, very Bhutanese move, the prime minister didn't just order an attack. He actually went to the camps himself. He walked into the jungle and met with the militant leaders. He pleaded with them. He said, "Please leave our country. We don't want violence. Just go."
And what did the insurgents say?
They were arrogant. They looked at this small Bhutanese force and basically laughed in his face. They reportedly told him, "The Indian army cannot dislodge us. What can you possibly do?"
Oh, that is a classic mistake. You never taunt the quiet ones.
Indeed. In December of 2003, the Royal Bhutan Army launched a surprise attack, and they were shockingly efficient. In 48 hours, they overran and destroyed 30 camps. They completely routed the militants.
But it's the detail of what was happening back in the capital that just stuck with me. The part that makes this story so uniquely Bhutanese.
Yes. The Queen Mother of Bhutan wrote a letter describing the atmosphere. She said that while the soldiers were in the jungle fighting, the monasteries across the country were full. People were offering prayers and lighting thousands and thousands of butter lamps. But they weren't just praying for victory. They were praying for the souls of the militants who were being killed.
Killing their enemies, but praying for their souls at the same time. That is such a profound contrast to the way we usually talk about counterinsurgency.
It really highlights the unique cultural fabric of that part of the world. Even in the midst of war, there was this recognition of a shared humanity.
We've covered so much heavy ground: war, betrayal, migration, death. But I want to try and end on a slightly more hopeful note from the book. Hazarika takes us on a visit to a place called Rambagri in the Garo Hills, and he shows us two very different visions of development, side by side.
This is the perfect little parable to sum up the whole Delhi versus local problem.
On one side of the valley, you have a massive government project, a ropeway.
Right, a huge, expensive engineering project that was intended to help local farmers transport their goods across the valley. It cost millions of rupees. It was planned in Delhi, funded by Delhi, and built by outside contractors.
And what does it look like today?
It's a ghost. It's a rusting hulk. The cabins are empty, just swaying in the wind. It never really worked because the local community wasn't involved in the planning. It didn't suit their actual needs. They didn't know how to maintain it. It just stands there as this massive rusting monument to the CPWD syndrome, a solution imposed from the top down that completely failed.
But right next to this monument to failure, there's something else. a fish sanctuary.
Yes. And this wasn't built by some government ministry. It was started by the local village headman and a guy named Armstrong Sangma.
Armstrong Sangma. What a great name. And he's a badminton champion, right?
Of course he is. He's a local hero. And they just decided to take charge of their own resources. They declared a certain stretch of the river a protected area. They banned fishing there to let the fish populations recover. They cleaned up the riverbanks. They built a little picnic spot for visitors.
And what happened?
It's a massive success. The fish population has exploded. Tourists come for picnics and to see the fish. The village makes money from it. It works because it is theirs. They own it.
It's such a simple, clear lesson, isn't it? When you treat people as partners in their own development, they thrive. When you treat them as subjects to be managed from a distance, you get rusting ropeways and deep-seated resentment.
Precisely. The people of the Northeast are not helpless. They have the ingenuity, the community spirit, and the resilience to solve their own problems. They just need the mist to clear. They need to be seen by the rest of the country as equal partners, not as a perpetual security problem or a wasteland to be exploited.
So let's try and wrap this all up. We traveled from that terrifyingly thin chicken's neck to the tea gardens running on their own secret time. We've watched the high-stakes poker game of partition, and we've been in the jungles of Bhutan. What is the big takeaway for you from Strangers of the Mist?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that nation building isn't something you finish and check off a list in 1947. It's a constant, ongoing process. We look at a map and we think those lines are solid and permanent. But this book teaches us that those lines are actually quite fragile.
The mist obscures things, but it also reveals things if you look closely enough.
Right. The Northeast isn't just a headline about trouble. It's a living laboratory where communities are fighting every single day to reconcile their ancient identities with these very modern and sometimes very arbitrary borders. It's a place where simply setting a clock can be a profound act of rebellion.
And it leaves us with a final provocative thought about those lines we draw on maps.
It does. Hazarika leaves us with this powerful image of the chicken's neck and the border fences. We love drawing lines to create order. We think a fence can stop history. But as the story of Sheikh Bara shows, and in the relentless floods of the Brahmaputra show, hunger and rivers do not respect lines on a map.
If you are hungry enough, you will cross any line.
Exactly. As long as that Malthusian nightmare exists next door in Bangladesh, and as long as that stark economic disparity remains, people will keep coming through the mist. No law, no fence, and no army is ultimately stronger than the basic human drive to survive.
That is a very powerful place to leave it. Next time you look at a map of India, don't just glance at the big middle part. Look way off to the right at that little sliver of land hanging on by a thread. Think about tea garden time, the rusting ropeway, and the strangers in the mist. Thanks for diving in with us today.